Started. This is a meeting of the City Council's working group on digital equity. And our agenda for tonight is ambitious. The first thing we're going to do is hear a presentation from PVPC on their interim digital equity report, which was issued yesterday. And then we'll have a brief discussion on the report. After that, I'd like the committee members to review the proposed final report from our committee that I prepared and circulated to everybody earlier today. And we'll go through that and hopefully vote on that and get that approved. And that will be enough to handle during this meeting. So with that, just by way of introductions, the members of the committee who have joined us and who are present currently are Alex Martin, Charlie Knight, myself, Will Brock, and Jean Canosa Albano. We may be joined by some other members of the committee later on, but for now, that's who we've got. Our representatives from PVPC are Michael, Doug, and Eric. I think that's your full team, right? Yep. And I believe the rest of the participants who I've admitted and are either representatives from Wayfinders and their working group or the public who are interested in seeing what we're doing here and this important work. So thank you for joining us too. So with that, why don't we turn it over to PVPC to talk about their interim report. And then we can discuss the report, and then we'll go and talk about my final report that I circulated to the committee earlier today. So Eric, why don't you take it away?
I can do that. First of all, good evening to everybody. Some of us are becoming old friends here as we've gone through this process, which is great. I got to know Charlie a little bit. I've definitely gotten to know B, and Jean has been great, as has Nydia. And I don't think we need to do introductions is what I'm going at. I think we all know why we're here. We were charged with coming up with an interim report and this is a draft of that interim report. So we're open to full comment. This is very much a summary of where things are at. It is by no means intended to be final. But I know that this committee, its clock runs out at the end of December, and then the new city council will have a decision to make about what they want to do going forward. And even though I'm jumping to the end, we strongly support the city having a committee like this on an ongoing basis for the next while, if that helps in your decision making. So with that, Doug has it on his machine, but I'm going to ask him to turn pages for me. So Doug, if you can go to page 2, that would be great. So without really reading the detail, which is not my intent here tonight, I don't pretend to read a report in front of all of you. That would be bad practice. The beginning of the report gives a little bit of history and background as to how come we're where we're at. We discuss what the digital divide is all about and why we're here to try to work with it. It definitely reflects exactly what the original grant was all about. The scope of work is directly lifted from that. It went from the passive tense to the active tense because it's things that we're working on. So we work with the core planning team. We're conducting asset mapping. We're providing data and research, which will show some to you. We're doing quite a bit of outreach, and we're trying to do some other outreach in other types of forums. And although we have already done a number of forums, we intend to do more. So the chart that you see in front of you is right out of the scope of work, but it gives you a description of what's happening, most of which is ongoing, meaning we're doing many different things at the same time. Yeah.
Excuse me, Eric. Sorry, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but at least at my end, the view is very small. I wonder if it can be adjusted, maybe by closing another window or maximizing somehow.
Back to my tech friend, we will see.
Okay. Unless others aren't having the same issue I am.
No, Gene, I recommended making it a little bigger too. So
Thank you. Okay.
And not that our eyes are getting older or anything like that, but is that better?
For me, it is.
Is that better for everybody? Oh yeah, by all means, say hello to each other in the chat. That's a great idea, by the way. Okay, so I'm just kind of going through the steps here. We did a lot of prep work. We are gathering as much data as we can, and there's much more to come. There's quantitative and qualitative data in which we talk to people. The asset mapping is certainly a significant part of what the state is looking for to see what's in place and what needs to be improved or added to. If you can go down just a little bit, Doug, that would be great. Yeah, I know that I'm just responding to what Charlie said. We did get the report out so everybody could have a copy of it as well. So thank you for that. We have definitely developed some outreach materials, but we'll be doing more. And we just finished a round of engagement with stakeholders, which I will describe in a couple of minutes. It went very well. We learned a lot, but we know that there's a lot more to do here. And in terms of short-term and long-term funding and developing final recommendations, we're a couple months from that, but we know that it's important to be there and have that ready to go. Next page, Doug. So these are the things that we will do at the conclusion, which is we definitely want to work with the city and this group on a vision statement. We definitely want to work on strategies and implementation plans. We want to produce a top quality plan for the city that it can share as it sees fit, and it will help line things up for short-term and long-term funding opportunities. And also the other piece, obviously, that's here is that there needs to be ways to develop and monitor evaluation mechanisms to maintain communication, i.e. that you want to make sure that this is followed through and it doesn't just wander off all by itself, which I don't think that's going to happen, but I know that it's important to make sure. So in terms of data gathering, I'm going to turn it over right here to Doug. He by far and away is our data guy, and let him describe the different pieces of data. These are samples. This is not all of the data, but this is a way of showing you that we have been looking back at as much data as we can and trying to pull data together that would be relevant to this process. So Doug, if you want to take it from here, that would be great.
Yeah. So the first few slides are really just trying to, lay the foundation and make it clear that, we know that there is a vast digital divide in the city of Springfield. And I hate to say this, but it's nice to have data that actually shows that. It gives us, a solid foundation to work from. This first chart is looking over a 1 to 5 year period at different income levels and the extent to which families in those income levels have broadband internet subscription. And as you can see, there's a fairly significant gap between, the very low income folks, families with less than $20,000 of household income, and substantially wealthier folks whose incomes range from $75,000 up. And I think it's clear that although on the one hand that gap, it's fairly constant over time. If you're just comparing the numbers from 2018 to 2022, it certainly appears as though the lower income folks have seen the greatest growth in terms of their the extent to which they have internet subscriptions. This is where the credible data guy in me should point out that all of these estimates have fairly wide ranges of potential error. So that 51%, might range from 42% to 59% or something like that. But in most cases, even though that's kind of a factor in the background, I think the general picture is quite clearly fairly consistent over time. And obviously that's not what we'd like to see ideally. Moving on to the next chart, this chart is looking at the same issue, whether or not families have an internet subscription. And here we're drilling down to the census tract level, and most of the charts and maps that we show are going to be looking at that level. And what I've generally done, probably should have included some methodology notes or something like that, is in each of the maps I've identified the census tract with the highest level of whatever we're looking at and the lowest level of whatever we're looking at. And then during our community meetings, for example, we would also include a data point that would show what that rate was in the geographic area where we are actually meeting. So here you can see that in this Metro Center census tract, 47%, almost half of households did not have an internet subscription. And that contrasts significantly with 5% who didn't have an internet subscription in this census tract of East Forest Park. And that general picture, or the inverse of that, is really what we see in each of these. The actual specific census tracts that are either highest or lower, bounce around a little bit, but not so much that it paints a different picture, really. So another measure of digital inequity or digital equity, depending on which way you're coming at it from, is whether or not families have access to a desktop or a laptop computer, or if the only computing device that they have is a smartphone. Certainly, one of the things that we consistently hear from folks and that we consistently tell folks is that having a smartphone is great and it gets you partway there. But there's an awful lot of things that if you wanted to be able to do on a computer, you might be able to do them on a smartphone, but it's going to be a whole lot harder and more challenging. And even just like the physical barriers of navigating that much smaller screen, definitely an impediment to actual equity. And so what you're seeing here over, again, a 5-year period, we see, I would say, I think it's clear that there is certainly growth in the percentage of Springfield homes that do have access to a desktop or a laptop computer. In terms of the folks that are relying on a smartphone, it's less clear that that's a trend in one way or another based on the data that we have here. I think that the actual slope of that line, because of the way it falls, is actually like showing very, very modest growth, but not really so much that you would want to hang your hat on that. And anyone can, please feel free to interrupt at any point if you're so inclined. So here you can see, this is another example. This is sort of the another example where we're drilling down again on the same issue at the local level, at the census tract level. And here the disparities are, really almost as vast as with the previous example. In this Metro Center census tract, 37%, so more than a third, are relying just on a smartphone. And we see a much smaller number than that in that census tract of East Forest Park. And, what really strikes me when looking at those data is sort of looking at them in relation to other things that we know to be the case. Essentially those maps that I've been showing you, the map would look the same if we were showing you, educational attainment, or if we are showing you median household income or poverty. You're either going to see the dark in good areas and light in not so good areas, or the inverse of that. And so just using that last map as an example, pulling up those two census tracts, the 37 and the 2%, you'll recall from the previous slide. But as you look down that, like on these other socioeconomic indicators, it boggles the mind the extent of the disparities that you're looking at there. And certainly, some of these things are things that, were very much reinforced in what we were hearing from people. For example, the language barrier, I think, is huge. In our first public meeting in Brightwood, we had a family talking about their experience in the initial period of COVID when kids were supposed to be learning remotely. And this woman who came to our meeting because she wanted to interact with us, she brought her kids along because she just, first of all, I don't know if she knew that we were going to have a translator there, but, certainly she was clearly unable to communicate effectively in English. And I think because of that, she probably didn't even know that there were resources available to her that they could have been tapping into for her kids to continue to learn during those months of COVID when people were learning remotely. And so, her daughter lost, I think she said, a 3-month chunk of learning because of that. So again, and I think, one thing that really drives this home for me is that, we know that on the one hand, each of these disparities is great, but we also know that the presence of a digital divide exacerbates that situation for those families. It makes it less likely that they will be able to catch up in terms of their educational attainment, in terms of their income, et cetera. So it's very much a foundational issue that we know we need to wrap our heads around and then shape our public policies to improve that situation. We do have some data on download speeds. One thing that's really hard to get reliable data on are sort of micro level data. This data is looking at the city level, comparing monthly average download speeds in Springfield, and I've included Holyoke just as a point of comparison. And you can see, over time, they're fairly consistent over time. I would say that the data that we have on download speeds, I feel like there's a lot of information out there, but it's hard to derive actual meaning from looking at the data. And that's certainly a frustration, but one that we're trying to navigate. The other, I think, related thing that we've been exploring is the extent to which competition in providers has an impact on what you're looking at. So this first map here is showing it's trying to give you a sense of the coverage that each provider is providing or able to provide. And so at the city level, we have Comcast, saying they've got 100% coverage. And you can see sort of little morsels of competition popping up. Certainly the cell phone providers. Yes, Jean?
I feel like this is small again, or this is particularly in need of being embiggered.
All right, let me
That
see what
can
I can do
happen.
here. Well, I'll tell you what, let's go to the next slide, which
Okay.
gives, this first one is really just painting a picture of, oh, good, Springfield kind of thing.
Okay. Thank you.
But the next one drills down to the actual, the census block level. And what's really fascinating here, we hear people saying, and I will make this bigger for you, if that helps. Bigger and I think the takeaway here is that certainly, as a whole, the city of Springfield does not have much competition. Basically, the areas that are shaded green, that's reflecting the existence of some competition, so 2 or more providers. And so, the center core of the city is completely not green, except for the roads, obviously. And where we do see competition, it's, quite literally spilling over from surrounding communities. So we've got Chicopee on the north side there, Wilbraham along the east side, and then a chunk of East Long Meadow on the south side. And, certainly, I don't think we have like comparison of prices data that sort of drives home the extent to which it's an advantage to have competition. But certainly everything that we know about the way businesses operate, I think makes it clear that the more of this map that we figure out how to turn, light and or darker shades of green, the better off we will be, and residents will be moving forward. And I think that might be the last. Yeah, that's the last of the.
Come back to me, and if you can shrink it down just a tad, that would be great.
Yep.
Perfect. Is that good for everybody?
I
So-
just want to echo what Jean had asked, which is that I think if we can take aside the left menu, which is the toolbar, it might help. Great.
Boom. So that
I did-
that is the summary of the data pieces that we have, some of the data pieces that we have, which reflect what we thought we knew, but I think it's important to have the reinforcement of the data for a lot of different reasons. When we get to the end of the process and we're justifying what we'd like to, the recommendations and things that need to be added, and things that need to be put in place for the city, it's important to have that. So we recognize that a significant part of this effort is the community engagement. And we know that when we signed an agreement in late October that we were trying to get things done as quickly as possible towards the end of December for the sake of the committee and the sake of the city, which we have tried to do. So there are two levels. There are two levels of committee that we have right now. One is the core group, which is Frank Robinson, Michael Fenton, Gene Canosa, Roberta, and Tom Ash. And then we have this larger group, which we're meeting with tonight. And I have accidentally mistyped Gene's name one more time. Well, I like Jean a lot. I don't want her to hold it against me. She's a words person. So, but there's quite a group involved. If you can go down a little bit, Doug, that would be great. And we appreciate all the input, and we fully expect to get feedback on our report, our interim report from all of you in whatever ways that Michael and this committee decide.
Oh, pardon me.
Well, I knew that. There you go.
There's on the serious side, there's a question in the chat from Keishla about, for Doug, could you please remind us how recent the censuses are?
Oh, okay. Go back to that for a minute, Doug, and then I'll keep going.
Very good question. So, for the city level data that I was able to show, for the data that comes from the census, we were able to use the 1-year census. So, up until this morning, the most recent data that we had was for 2022. No, that's not true. It's the 5-year data that we today got more recent information for, which we will certainly incorporate into future iterations of this report. So at the city level, we can use 1-year data that's sort of 1 year old. At the census tract level, or any sort of area smaller than the entire city, we have to rely on 5-year data. And so again, up until this morning, that would have been 2017 to 2021 data. And we now have 2018 to 2022 data as well. And it sounds good that it's a year more recent, but what that really just ends up meaning is that 20% of the data set that they're pulling from essentially is different than the previous year. And for some of these things, you'd like to think that the fact that it's stale data, at least somewhat stale data, might mean that it's not accurately reflecting the progress that's been made. I think the reality is that an awful lot of the indicators that we look at probably have not changed that much over a 5-year window. Does that answer your question? Any aspect of that?
Yes, thank you.
So if you can go down a little bit more, Doug, that would be great. So we have held a series of 4 meetings so far, 3 live and 1 electronic, The meetings have been lightly attended. They're not heavily attended at this point in time. And so we're recognizing the fact that although these were strategically held around the city, that we need to go back and do more. And the most common note that we got was, let's do it with the community at the community level, with the community groups directly, like the New North, et cetera. So we know we're going to have to do some more outreach, and that is part of the process. That's just part of the process. And we have to make sure we really engage the connectors who can get us to the places that we need to be to connect with the right people. And that's on us to do, and we know that. But we have some really good feedback already. And that's really what this next section of the report is about. If you can go down just a little bit, Doug, that would be great. So in each of the sessions, we had a discussion with the group. We talked for just a little while, and then we had an open discussion with the group. And this is a summary of the comments that we got. And Michael put it together for us, which I really appreciate. And none of this is going to be a shock, but it's really important to know that digital inequity is influenced by one's employment, access, affordability, knowledge. It's worse in the disenfranchised communities, lack of options, devices that you have access to, stability of your job, income, poverty. And none of these can be taken lightly. All these are important factors. And then we opened up the discussion to talk to people about the ways that having internet access is important to them. And by all means, everybody take out their red pen and have at it with the report. I'm perfectly comfortable with that. This is your report, not our report. So none of this is a shock. There's medical care, there's banking, there's access to information, there's applying for jobs, mental health services, housing. You can list them all out. These are well documented, but that doesn't change the fact that it's as important in Springfield as it is anywhere else, especially as we learn from the data that we're gathering that there are these significant gaps in what goes on. If you can go down, Jug, that would be great. So the discussion then works towards what are some of the barriers that people see. And Michael, Michael DiChiara, I'm going to ask you to take these on if you could, and help us talk through these.
And just Eric, in terms of a time check, we are a half hour in. So
Okay, we're close to done.
How much time do you think you'll need to wrap it?
Less than 5 minutes.
That's okay.
Yeah,
15 minutes is fine. I just want to make sure.
Oh, okay. I didn't know how short on time. We can do that. Okay.
And
Okay, good.
so sorry, but my colleague on the committee, Alex, had her hand raised. I'm not sure if your question was answered.
Okay, Alex, what's up?
My question is that when I look at the citizens that is helping, my name was not on the list.
Okay, we'll make sure it gets added. Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you.
strong member.
Sorry about that, Alex. You are on the other full report. We'll get you added to this one. And there are other hands that are being raised in the queue, but I'm going to ask everybody to just please hold your comments and questions until their presentation's done, please.
Appreciate that.
so in the interest of time, and also because I didn't want to read the list, I was just going to highlight some comments that I think are helpful that maybe are a little different or worth sort of highlighting and raising up. So in this next section, it actually is probably categorized incorrectly, but in the what are the barriers to digital equity? Two things that were raised that I think are helpful. One is that there has been consistently an interest in having a municipally owned broadband system and exploring what that would look like. There is infrastructure money. It's a huge step, but that's something that's come up in all the groups. And then one of the barriers which has come up, which I don't think we were aware of, is, there's the Affordable Connectivity Program, which for the most part is income eligible based. You can be enrolled in Mass Health or SNAP and such like that. But one of the key population groups that is sort of left out in the cold with that is seniors, and that, they tend not to be in some of those categories in terms of enrollment, but they're usually on fixed incomes. So they might be just over that. So that's just something in terms of the population of Springfield. I think it's probably true for the entire Commonwealth. Moving on to the next category of what would make digital equity possible. Two of the things that came up. One we heard when we were at Brightwood, which is the concept of normalizing technology. So although we were meeting in a library and we love having libraries with technology, the point was it should be everywhere in the community so that people don't have to go to a special place to use a computer or be exposed to the internet. And so that was just a really interesting thought. And then the other is that it's not a one-time fix. The technology is always changing. And so what we plan for now, we'll be addressing issues, but things will evolve, whether it's technology, it's software, et cetera. And so in terms of city planning, realizing this is an ongoing commitment and the goalposts will continue to move. So that's, unlike, I guess fixing a road, you're gonna have to pave it over and over, but this is a little bit more dynamic than perhaps that. And then a couple of specific things that were recommended in what does Springfield need to do. One, this came up in two or not three of the meetings, was the concept of wide area mesh networks, which are sort of small wireless networks over a series of blocks or an area. Specifically, it was looking to be installed in places in Springfield that have low access already. So it could be a city park, it could be a neighborhood gathering place, it could be just where around an anchor institution. So that's something that was consistent. Developing a community advisory group to help the city figure out how to allocate awarded funds once they come down from the state. So that not only is there community input on the front end in terms of identifying needs and possibilities, but actually helping inform how the funds get distributed. And then a couple of times it was raised that we need to engage youth in the entire process, both in the needs and possibilities conversation, but also subsequently, because they're knowledgeable at this and they're very much invested in how this will work in the future. And then I think the last thing that I would say that we heard, and it gets to what Eric was saying, is that the follow-up meetings really need to be where people are at in the neighborhoods. So, what we've been talking about is identifying organizational community allies, informal leaders who can really figure out where do we need to be, even though we were in, neighborhoods and had conversations that we need to do more of that to get better feedback. So there's a lot more here, but I think as Eric said, some of the stuff is reaffirming what we've heard in the state and in national, but there's definitely some things that are unique and haven't shown up in other places.
So you can move down, Doug. We have a set of 5 initial recommendations, and we know this list is going to grow and be reinforced and be more significant. So we don't pretend that this is the be all to end all. It says preliminary. We should put 3 underlines under that word to be clear that that's what it is. And Jean with her red pen will help us with that. But I know that the one of the primary concerns is making sure that the infrastructure is in place. And if it's not in place, to make sure that we find a way to try to get it in place, i.e. find the funding, so find the right program, get that done. There was a significant discussion at one of the, I think it was in Mason Square, about they don't want this effort to become another unkept promise to the underserved, that they've had a number of offers and proposals, and it always seems to be that something doesn't happen and it just kind of stops. And to that end, some people have talked about an ambassador or a digital, person out there who could be serving the city to make sure that things are followed through on, and that's probably a good place to go. It can't be understated, whether you call it training, education, or outreach, that you can have all the devices in the world, but if people don't know how to use them or aren't comfortable using them, then it's not going to really get you anywhere. So there's a critical piece here in terms of outreach and connecting all the outreach pieces together, whether it's high school, stick, and there are a number of things out there that people don't have all the details to. And one of the things that would be really useful to have some sort of centralized information that we can share with people in terms of what's available and how we could do that. I'll skip to the last one. The other piece that was really significant at one of the workshops that we did was the concept that some people fear digital technology because it's invasive, and they find that they don't want anybody to know either where they are, what they're doing, or how they're doing it. That this just feels, and yeah, it is invasive. We think of the way your house is set up now versus 20 years ago. So, but I think that that's one of the things that is important, is to recognize that that fear is there, and people need help through outreach training and other efforts to make sure that they can get access at least what they need. They don't have to be online all the time, but at least what they need. And there's one other piece that we probably should have added somewhere in the guts of the report, which we will, is that there definitely is, as Michael said, this idea of publicly owned presence. But as important as that is, it's the idea that there needs to be equal access, something along the lines of a utility, whether it's water or electricity or something like that, and that it shouldn't be that it's just for the privileged or it's a luxury, that this has now become a requirement of the way we live, and we've all grown to depend on it. Last but not least, the recommendation about this is not just a one-shot effort. People don't want to see that in 10 years, you're 10 years behind the curve. That's not the goal. The goal is to make sure that Springfield catches up and then stays abreast of everybody else for all the obvious reasons in terms of development, information, infrastructure, long-term goals, how things are going to pan out with regards to other factors like East-West Rail and development in the region. So these are all real things that have to be done. We recognize that. We recognize that this is an interim report. We hope that the committee is pleased with what they've seen. We welcome your feedback, and we'll take questions at this point as well.
Okay, thank you, Eric, and your team at PVPC. See, you've got some more people in the waiting room here, so let these folks in. Okay, so this is the interim report, and just to put some added context into this, the reason that we have this report now is at my request, which was urgent, to get it before this meeting so that we could have a summary preliminary report to present to the city council as a part of this committee's final report to the council based on the work that we've been doing for the last year. So this is not the final digital equity plan. And it is, I don't think, customary to prepare it in this format and submit it for public discussion until the more comprehensive work is complete. But I do want to acknowledge and thank PVPC for their effort in putting this together, because really the reason that this is being developed at this time is because I didn't want the committee to be concluding their year-end activities and not have at least some form of summary report from PVPC to present to the city council. So I wanted to remind everyone of that and provide that additional context. So at this time, Doug, you're still screen sharing. If you could please stop that so we can see everybody. Thank you. Now, why don't we first entertain questions or comments from the committee about this report? And then if there's any comments or questions from the public and time allows, we'll have some of that too. Okay, so Will, go ahead.
So two comments. One, and this is something that I'm just starting to learn about. Did we, in terms of the data, this is probably a question for you, Doug. Did we take into account at all the buildings in the downtown area that are, the building itself is set up for Wi-Fi and the accounts or like your internet goes through basically the building rather than a separate contract? And then the second comment would be, I sent this to Gene by accident, just privately, but based on the data and the disparity, it also looks like holding a meeting in the metro area would definitely make sense as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. In terms of your question, certainly the data that we have access to seems to acknowledge that reaching the building and reaching the homes within a building are two separate things. There are some discrepancies in the data, which we're trying to sort of figure out, like what the cause of those disparities is, those differences in the data that we're seeing. It's a little bit fuzzy, and we're relying on data sources from the Broadband Institute, from FCC, Federal Communications Data, and some of those sources are relying on providers themselves, producing the information. So, certainly one of the things that we have been hearing, I feel like the most stark presentation of it would be that, a lot of folks are saying that they don't have access on the one hand, and on the other hand, we have providers saying we've got 100% coverage. So, clearly it's hard to circle that square kind of thing. We are in the midst of having some meetings with the folks from Comcast that hopefully will shed additional light on that. And certainly we also are very aware that the equity would require both adequate, but also improving over time, download speeds and that sort of thing. Whatever is adequate, today, we know in 5 years will not be adequate. In 2 years, it probably won't be adequate. So to a certain extent, the goalposts are moving over time, and we're aware of that. I'm sure the providers are aware of that as well. But it sort of reinforces the urgency of the moment that we're in, and the necessity of getting, a solid foundation in place that we can then build on top of over time.
Thank you, Doug. Does that answer your question, Will?
Yes, it's actually kind of an ongoing question. I'm going to learn more about it as I move into a new apartment. So that was just kind of a new thing that I learned about, knowing that the apartment buildings themselves are actually set up for Wi-Fi rather than having to go through, Comcast itself and get a separate box. You actually, I'm being told to contact a kind of a private, Comcast representative, and that the building's set up. So it's basically just sign on and, set up your account. I guess my bigger question is more so taking into account the amount of, because there are income qualified units in that building. How many of those income qualified units are part of, this disparity and the people that are experiencing the problems with digital inequity?
Yeah, I can just answer that, two of those things real quickly. One thing to think about is quality of service. So in multi-dwelling units, sometimes depending on the construction, it's not a hard wire to a unit, it could be wireless. So that changes the quality of the signal, whether it's regardless of the income level. So that's something to be aware of. And then in terms of the income eligibility, there has been discussion at the state level about, can you use the Affordable Connectivity Program at the building level? So the building gets a discount and then distributes it so that it's not reliant on each unit to apply for the ACP and go through all those hoops. So it's sort of an advocacy discussion that hasn't seen the light of day yet in terms of a solution, but it's definitely been raised, because if you could do building by building and you wouldn't have to rely on residents to actually go through all the processes, you'd probably get better affordable coverage quicker.
And I learned about an inverse of that with the Springfield Housing Authority when I had a conversation with Denise Jordan, which is that they have coverage within the apartments, but none of their community rooms are wired. And so in terms of having outreach in the community rooms and being able to perform functions there that rely on the internet, they just can't do it right now.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Will. Charlie?
I was unmuting. The last thing first, I guess. I have something I want to say, but I want to also say, I guess my building, and I'm on the board of directors for it, is ahead of the curve. We wired all our units for cable access, and then we additionally have Wi-Fi from the office available in the community room. So we got it pretty good here for our folks as far as that's concerned. And we only have like one market rent unit. So for us as a building, it would be real easy to transfer over to that whole thing. And we were wired back in 95 when 2 cable access was wondered. And so I'm wondering about buildings like that that have the two access points and only one's being used, if we can work with Comcast to be able to identify one of those access points, one of those F connectors as not being theirs throughout the entire system, and the other one left so that the building could do its own mesh network and people could then get Comcast if they wanted for their television and stuff. I don't know how many buildings were like us, wired with the two spots in it, one of them not being used now. That's a possibility within us. All right, enough of all that talk. I noticed that we are at the bottom of the list, which, by the way, happens to be a very high point to be. We're 20th down the list of 20 in the nation of the cities that have best Wi-Fi access for people out just going around. But I'm wondering if we as a city can identify at our building areas where the Wi-Fi reception is good for people, even outside of the building, so that we can go way up on that list, because we've got that within many of our buildings, but people may not know what side of the building they go to be able to access it. So we could increase our ratings that way with just some signage so the public knows where to stand to be able to get on the internet. And then I'll shut up.
Charlie, I think that's related to what you put in the chat, and a question to clarify there. Are you talking about buildings in the city or buildings that are owned by the city, like the libraries or City Hall? Or
buildings that are owned by the city, so the city can put up signage unilaterally by itself, and suddenly we increase our standing, but we haven't done much of anything to do it. We just put the signage up so the public knows. If you go on the parking lot side, I'm making up stuff, go on the parking lot side of Mason Square Library, you can get solid internet without ever coming in the library.
Okay, gotcha. I understand now what you're saying. Thank you. I can work on that for the library part of it and see how we can do that for other city buildings.
And the rest of the city can follow your example.
Thank you, Charlie. Okay, I had a couple of, maybe it was just a few comments on the report. One is on page 10, we need to add committee member Alex Martin.
Yep.
And she pointed that out. Also, the concept of the core planning team versus the committee. I don't fully understand that. I think that should be stricken. I don't know that that's
Okay.
I don't know that that's accurate to say. We never really
Okay.
designated people as more senior than others. It is true to say, though, that this is being prepared for the city of Springfield, not for this committee, and we've just sort of tried to help you guide through this process. So if you could find a way to kind of tweak that language at the beginning of page 10 a little bit to make that more clear. And then B had a point about the spelling of wayfinders, cap W, cap F with a space. If you could just do a word search and try and fix that throughout.
Yep.
And then until I'm the lawyer, huh? And then my last one was on page 9. If you could pull that slide up, please, page 9. This is the presence of competition around the city slide.
Yep.
So I wonder if someone from PVPC, this was the thing that made everything in the presentation and the report looks really terrific, especially considering the expedited nature and the draft nature in which I asked you to prepare it. This is the slide that confuses me the most. I don't understand how there is any competition, even in the lightly shaded or darker shaded areas on the periphery of Springfield. And specifically, I see my street and my house listed as a place where there's competition, and I'm not familiar with any choice that I have other than Comcast. So if you zoom in on the northwest portion of Springfield, that's right where I am. So, yeah, you gotta go down. And that would be the east. That's the southeast. So go to the northwest. Yeah.
what are you suggesting that it might be better till this can be clarified more tightly that, we might be better holding this back on this preliminary report and waiting until the final report to get this,
Not
to
my
increase the
suggestion.
level of accuracy?
No, that's not my suggestion.
Okay.
First I want to understand it. So like, how can it be that people who are in those light green or dark green areas have multiple choices for carriers? Explain that to me.
I think that's a really good question, and I don't have a good answer for it, unfortunately.
I
You know,
believe
this-
I have an answer for you.
Alright, go
No
ahead.
matter where you are in the city, you're still able to get access through T-Mobile, which is sort of like a cell phone, and the same things with people with various cell phones. So that isn't requiring a cable structure. Other people may be able to have a satellite, so consequently they get internet access, but it's not requiring a physical thing. So that might be part of it. I'm not sure, but
Well,
it's a way.
I hear you, Charlie, but if that was the case, then it wouldn't make sense why it would only be on the extreme edges of the city, because T-Mobile has coverage throughout the whole city. So this data seems to be implying that there's, the closer you are to the boundary with another city or town, you might have some spillover capability to tie in with another carrier. And I don't know that that's true at all. I know it's certainly not true to my knowledge for me and my house. And I see that where my house is in that light green area.
All right.
I got two thoughts. Not that I know the answer, Michael, but one, just building on what Charlie is saying, I think it's, so for this, the city has a contract, for cable service, TV for Comcast. So I think framing the question is like, are there non-contractual providers that can be in the city bounds, but not, outside of that contractual relationship, even though it's TV and not internet. So I think that sort of builds on the framing of Charlie's thing. The other thing I'll just say, like, I know if you go to the federal listing, the FCC listing for the ACP providers, there are, even if you just look at Western Mass generally, there's this long list that the FCC says is providing services to our region and particular municipalities that don't really do that. And so I think there's fictional coverage that, as you're pointing out, is not practically the case. So I think it's a matter of sort of digging in and figure out what's the source database for that. Because, if you're signing someone up for ACP at Springfield Partners, you look down the list, really you can only sign someone up for Comcast. But on the website, it looks like you might have 3 or 4 choices. So how those people get on the list is sort of questionable.
What tool and data set is used to generate this map?
That's a Doug question.
Yeah, so this is an MBI map, which, as you can clearly see is identified as preliminary data. And, lots of us have had questions about certain elements of the MBI maps. I guess what I would suggest is that, certainly before we go much further in this process, I will make every effort to clarify, sort of the general questions about the origin of the data, and also, pose some hard questions around the specific thing you're getting at, which, certainly your interpretation of what we're seeing here is exactly the same as mine, which is that, the implication is that there's spillover. And it's entirely possible that that is not the case. And so here's the thing. Here's what I think might be happening is that in some cases there might be data. I mean, you can kind of see it as you move from the city level down to this census block level. If there's geography that spans city lines, you could have a bunch of people on one side of the yellow line who do have service, and a bunch of people on the other side of the line that don't have service. But if it's part of the same census block, which I don't think it should be, but that's sort of another source of explanation. And certainly this is something that we will add to our list of things that we will ask folks at Comcast about.
Thank you. And Doug, just to put a finer point, I agree with you. That's kind of what I was getting at. I think what's happening is you're seeing that someone on the Chicopee side of the line is being triggered as having that additional coverage, and it's the way that they're organizing the map is not by household. Obviously, they might not have that precision in this map. It's by a larger block. I don't think it's by census block, because I'm looking at this data and I know that I'm seeing different shades and gradients in the data within census block. So they're using something that's bigger than a per property basis, but smaller than a census basis, that I think, based on what we're discussing here, is leading to this inaccurate perception of multiple choices along the periphery of the city limits. So this is just a draft report. That's why we're doing this. And what I would suggest is you can keep the map for the draft report, but if you could just put in a note that we have reason to believe that this map may be showing choices for Springfield residents that don't currently exist, and that we're going to work on that as we come up with the more final report in 2024, that would be great. That would be my comment.
That's
Mike,
great.
I think I have another suggestion. It's very quick, and that is that this may be based upon the lines that were strung from the other cities coming into Springfield prior to the time that Comcast was granted the place in the city. So there may be lines physically somewhere, but disconnected from the other end because now it's served by Comcast. So if they just went by what infrastructure was there, they might show something, but that the other infrastructure from the other companies are not being used at the moment. So therefore it doesn't exist, even though the lines might be in the ground.
Entirely plausible. Entirely plausible. Okay. So obviously there's a lot here, and I want to thank PVPC for preparing this. How does the committee feel about submitting this draft report with our final report to the city council? And obviously with the caveats that this is just a draft interim report, and there will be a more full report submitted by PVPC sometime between April and May of 24. So Gene, Charlie, Will, Alex, am I missing anybody else that's on the committee that's
In the chat, I've already moved. We accept the report.
okay, is there a
I
second?
second.
Okay, motion made by Charlie, seconded by Will. Gene, you have your hand raised. You're on mute, Gene.
I knew I'd do it at least once a meeting. Is this with the, if we were to accept it tonight, would we still be able to make some of those changes, corrections, get in there with the red pen for the things that were noted this evening?
Yeah, that would be my
Spelling
intent.
and
But
proper attribution and so forth. Okay, thank you.
I agree with Gene. My name is misspelled, so we definitely need some red pen.
I didn't check the spelling on my name. I don't know. Maybe you got it right. But
It's all my fault.
but we would submit it nevertheless with its subject to the changes we just talked about, but nevertheless with some warts and imperfections to the city council as a draft interim report. So my request of PVPC is that some of the simple stuff we're talking about cleaning up here, you don't have to go through and redo the whole thing, but just the stuff we talked about tonight, like the spelling and the attribution. If you could get that tightened up in the next week, that would give us time to get it updated and send that to the city council. So with that caveat, we have a motion by Charlie and a second by Will. So I'll do a roll call. Charlie?
Yes, and I'm also saying that my motion includes all those caveats you added.
Okay, good. Thank you. And Will?
Yay.
Alex?
Yes.
Jean?
Yes.
And I'm also a yes. Am I missing anybody? There's a lot of people on the queue here. So am I missing anybody on the committee? I don't think so. Okay, good. So that's the interim report. Thank you very much, PVPC. The next piece of business that we have for the committee is to go over what I circulated earlier today, which is the committee's final report. And I no pride in authorship here. I did my best. These are just, this is my perspective. So if committee members disagree with something I've said in here or feel like I've materially left something out, then please chime in. And my hope is that we can approve this and then attach the PVPC interim report as an exhibit. So I did circulate it to the committee members, but because there's members of the public here who have not seen this, I am going to just read it out loud for everybody and would invite committee members to interrupt me if you have comments or edits as we go. And I'll actually be proofreading for myself. Okay, so City Council Working Group on Digital Equity Final Report. Committee members are Michael Fenton, Dr. Frank Robinson, Jean Canosa Albano, Charlie Knight, Roberta Walker Kilkenny, Archbishop Timothy Paul, Alex Martin, Justin Ayala, Christian Polanco, William Brock, Daryl Williams, and Giselle Gaines. The City Council Working Group on Digital Equity, the committee, was announced in January of 23 and was appointed in March by Council President Letterman. The committee's first meeting was in April. The committee's mission was to explore how best to combat the digital divide for the city and its residents. The committee met once a month and many more times in smaller working subcommittees. An engagement subcommittee was created and chaired by Roberta Walker Kilkenny and William Brock. Another subcommittee was formed to focus on recruiting a consultant to assist the committee with crafting a digital equity plan, known as the plan. This subcommittee was chaired by Dr. Frank Robinson. Everybody agree so far? Okay. It was determined by the committee that its primary objective would be to create a plan for the city of Springfield. The committee felt strongly that progress in attaining digital equity would be difficult to achieve until such time that Springfield had a robust plan. The committee then set out to determine how best to complete a plan for Springfield. Several meetings were held during which the committee explored various possibilities, including drafting the plan ourselves or engaging the assistance of third parties. Any changes to that paragraph?
Sounds okay, but all I would ask is that in the beginning, when you mentioned like a good lawyer, that from that point on, it's going to refer to as the committee. Maybe put that into non-layman language so everyone reading it, including all council members, will understand that, because they may not all be lawyers.
Oh, you mean because I'm defining it as committee, it's confusing to call it the committee, you mean?
Just saying, hereafter mentioned as the committee.
Well, I can call it something else. The reason I did that is because the first draft I had, Charlie, I kept calling it the City Council Working Group on Digital Equity, and that's a mouthful. And after I said it, after I typed it like the 6th time, that's why I went back and just called it the committee. So
yeah, I agree. I agree with what you're saying. I'm just saying that instead of just when you read it and then said the committee. So I'm asking only that the parentheses go hereafter called the committee.
Got it. That is very helpful.
Do you want to call it the DE committee so that it stands out as not just a committee, but the DE committee?
That's a good idea. Hereafter the DE committee. And then where I define the plan, I'll call it hereafter the plan. I have my lawyer goggles on. Thank you for making me see the light, Charlie. Thank you. Okay, so third paragraph. Through various discussions and research, primarily by Dr. Frank Robinson through his work with the Alliance for Digital Equity, it was determined that the committee should focus its efforts, plural, on obtaining a grant to fund a consultant to assist the city of Springfield with completing a plan. The Massachusetts Broadband Institute was identified as the most appropriate funder. Councilor Fenton and Jean Canosa Albano met with MBI. Jean Canosa Albano completed the grant application and Councilor Fenton approved it for submission on behalf of the city of Springfield. That paragraph okay? Okay. Chairman Fenton and Jean Canosa Albano met with the mayor to seek his support for the grant application on July 11th. We obtained the support letter from Mayor Sarno needed for the MBI grant application. The grant award of $120,000 was made and publicly announced at a press conference with the committee, Mayor Sarno, and Council President Letterman on November 2nd, 2023. The committee selected the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission to be the consultant funded by the MBI grant. The committee met with the PVPC and Wayfinders to outline the objectives of the plan and plan, there's two plans there. And why don't we say, and schedule. And schedule community outreach sessions. This included 5 neighborhood forums: East Springfield, Mason Square, East Forest Park, Brightwood, and 1 online remote session in 2023. Spanish interpreters and additional outreach to historically underrepresented communities were put forward by the committee. There will be 3 community charrettes in 2024 organized by Pioneer Valley Planning Commission. The final plan will be available in May of 2024. At the request of the committee, PVPC issued an interim report on December 6th, outlining its efforts and the work to be completed to finalize the plan. And then I'm going to attach it as Exhibit A. And that's the document we went over today. So, any changes to that from the committee for that paragraph?
I think the award amount is 102,250.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
102,250?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
There's a
Any other
sentence. Oh. There's a sentence that sounds a little off to me, which is about in the middle there. Spanish interpreters and additional outreach. That sentence there were put forward by the committee.
Well,
would that be the use of or including maybe?
We meant to say this, the committee encouraged.
I could say that the committee encouraged the use of.
Yes.
Okay.
And then we can eliminate the passive voice as well. So Charlie and I will both be happy.
I'm just trying to remember what we discussed. It may not be the clearest memory, but I'm trying.
Okay, so that's very good. I thought that was a little awkward too. So the committee encouraged the use of Spanish interpreters and additional outreach to historically underrepresented communities, period. Okay. Last paragraph. The committee is tremendously proud of its work and that its efforts will result in Springfield having a robust digital equity plan, thereby enabling the city to get access to critical state and federal funds to combat the digital divide. The committee thanks Council President Letterman for appointing this important committee and requests that the City Council find a way to continue its important work for the city through 2024, while PVPC finishes the plan. The committee's last meeting was on December 7th, 2023.
I agree with all of that, but I am trying to add something else. And that is, I would like to see, as we go forward, the areas of the city were found were least represented by having internet access, that we ask that those areas have some representation on any movement going forward, any committee or anything. So if we have found that many Hispanic speaking people or don't have internet access, as we have any sort of a committee or anything going forward, or the city itself, I feel should focus a little stronger on those people who we have identified with our work as not having, as the largest group of people who don't have internet access. In other words, we've done work to find out where the people are, and the PVCP have done work. Now that we've found out the people who are in need, let's focus anything in the future, any committees we have in the future, to have representation from those people.
I completely agree. I really like that. So I think before we talk about amending the report to include that, which I'm happy to do, let's just ask, I mean, we got the charrettes we're going to do in 24, right? So, or PVPC is going to do in 24. Why don't we just make a recommendation to them now for where they should do them. You're doing 3 charrettes, Eric, right? Eric? Oh, you're on mute.
I'm sorry, I was on mute. Yes, the
So-
plan is all charrettes, yes.
So 3. So if they're gonna do 3 more charrettes, I think it goes without saying, we gotta do one in the Metro Center, looking at the data. So does the committee agree with that? I think that's the easy one, Metro Center for sure. And then looking at that map on page, I guess it could be page 4 of the report. It looks like the south end is another spot that's really dark on that map. At least that's what's appearing to me.
I will also say, Michael, that if we need to add one more, we will do that. If that seems to be a way to create balance and representation, we're happy to do.
Yeah,
Yes,
well,
that's all I'm asking. All I'm asking is the people we identify, that any movement forward, we make sure those areas are represented by people.
so let's try to make PVPCs work a little easier here, because, you know, everyone will want one in their neighborhood. There's 18, we can't do 18. So why don't can PVPC call up the map so we can look at where the darkest areas are and try and select the 3 locations?
I have lost my man with the map. I can try, but it'll take me a few minutes to pull it all together.
All right, well, anybody who has it on their computer and is looking at the report, I can't really show it to you this way, but it's pretty clear that we did the right thing by doing one in Mason Square. That's dark in the map.
Yep.
Important to do one in Metro Center. We did
Yep.
Brightwood, which is, you know, not the darkest color, but is the, you know, the second darkest color here. I don't know what you would call it. It's like a red. But we should do one in Metro Center, and, you know, where that happens, PVPC can talk about that. Maybe one of the community rooms in one of Chestnut Towers or something like that would make sense. And then this other strangely pork chop shaped census tract to the south of Metro Center, that's the
Yep.
south end.
Right.
So I think doing one in the south end, maybe with the South End Citizens Council, or you could try and contact, what is Gordon Pulsifer's housing group? He has a good community room there out in the Hollywood section. First Resource.
Yes, yeah.
They have a accessible and regularly used community space.
Okay.
I think it's off of, is that Saratoga Street, I believe? So those
Yes.
are,
We've had community policing meetings there.
so those, I think those kind of speak for themselves, because those 2 areas are the 2
Yep.
darkest colored areas on the map that we haven't done meetings. So then there's a third, and you know, it would seem to me, looking at this map, the third probably makes sense to do in Indian Orchard based on those 2 darker colors in the northeastern section of the city. That's my 2 cents, but I don't know. What do you think, Gene and Charlie? And
If we do that, then we are basing where we are having charrettes based upon the work that's already been done. So I think that's a good idea.
Mhm.
I concur with Charlie.
There's a lot of talk about it being an iterative
Iterative
like for
process.
me to pronounce iterative process, but you know, changing as you learn more, right? When you know better, you do better, so to speak. So I like that too. I could share that image if you make me a co-host, but if most people have it in front of them.
Yeah, I'm pretty much so set in regards to that. The other part that I was looking at is in part of that report where it recommended having a follow through, having someone that could track that that this is happening,
Yes.
so that people will know that we did perform and that they will be getting results from our work. I did like that part, and I would like to address that at some point of how that would look.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Understood.
That accountability piece, I think, so the money doesn't get shunted off to the side for another project. We heard that from the community for sure, that was a concern.
Which money?
Whatever money this plan ends up getting us from the federal funds.
That's
Sorry, I should have been clearer.
okay. That's great. Yes, we should
Sorry.
do that. Okay, so Jean, you are co-host. I do think this is important for us to decide. So I think let's just see if we can go to 7:30 here. If that's okay with the committee, and then we should be able to wrap up. If you blow the map up, Jean, if you put your cursor on Metro Center,
Yeah.
so people can see. Yeah.
Down
So
here.
Metro Center is the dark shaded area there showing the worst access. And then the south end.
Is that
Yep.
here?
And the Metro Center section actually includes the north end.
That's a different map than the one I'm looking at.
Which
looking-
figure does it say?
I'm on-
Michael.
It should be on page 4.
The area that you're highlighting
Okay.
here is 6
You're on
squares.
you're on the next one. So.
I'm on figure 4. Sorry.
There you
Yeah,
go.
Figure
go.
2 here. Sorry, folks.
So the pork chop or the P-shaped space down there, that's the south end.
Right.
And the Metro Center is the larger conglomerate of lack of access. And then looking at this, the other dark shaded area we haven't really covered is to the northeast, which is Indian Orchard,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
up in that area.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we did Mason Square, we did Brightwood, we did East Springfield, and we did East Forest Park. In retrospect, East Forest Park probably wasn't necessary, but we didn't have this data then. So does the committee agree that that's where the charrettes should be held in those 3 locations, Indian Orchard, Metro Center, and South End? Okay.
I would move
I mean,
for that with the possibility of one on Boston Road, because that
With the possibility of doing one on Boston Road?
Like for the
There's-
Pine Point area and
Point did ask
beyond.
at one point in the whole process. So.
Well, I mean, I want to say in response to those 2 points. So on Boston Road, it's very close to Indian Orchard, as is Pine Point, and East Springfield is also abuts Pine Point and Indian Orchard. So I definitely don't think we should be doing 4 charrettes in Pine Point, Indian Orchard, Boston Road, and East Springfield. That doesn't seem reasonable. I do think that if we've already had one in East Springfield, which is right there, and that area is darkly shaded as well. I think by doing Indian Orchard, no, we haven't done it in Boston Road or Pine Point, but that will cover that geographic area. And I would also point out that the Indian Orchard Citizens Council covers Boston Road. So their members also
Yeah.
cover the Boston Road area now. They don't have a separate neighborhood council.
yeah, no, understood. Makes sense.
All right. So unless there's any objections, let's go with those 3. Objections?
With all those things that we have just spoken of, if there's no other additional stuff, I will move we accept the report as now verbally modified.
Okay, we got a motion on the floor, but first, Charlie, on your motion, are you comfortable with us leaving the report as it is, subject to the changes that we made, and not including any reference to what you were saying earlier about having the future charrettes in areas that were based on need? I'm not opposing that. I just think that it may be a little bit too detailed for this report, and we've just decided where they're going to be anyway. So do you feel that is essential?
Yes, I feel comfortable with that. The only thing that I ask you to do is to push forward as we go forward as a council member.
Thank you. And I will do that. Okay. So the changes to the report that you have in front of you are to change the definitions to include hereafter referred to change the grant amount from 120 to 102,250, Small change of the word plan to the word schedule. And we changed a sentence in the fourth paragraph to read, the committee encouraged the use of Spanish interpreters and additional outreach to historically underrepresented communities. And those were our changes. So Charlie's motion is to approve the report. Is there a second to that motion?
I second.
Okay, seconded by Will. We'll do a roll call. Charlie?
Why don't we have Gene do the roll call since you authored the report?
That sounds fine.
Okay. All
ahead,
right,
Jean.
so I'll do a roll call. I'm not sure, Alex, if you're still able to hear us, would you?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, good. And what is your vote on the
Yes.
motion? Yes, okay.
Yes.
Let's see. Charlie, what is your vote on the motion?
Of course, yes, I moved it.
I know. Will, I believe you haven't spoken yet.
Yes.
Okay. I'll vote yes. Is there anyone else who's a part of the DE committee that I haven't called on yet for the roll call?
You haven't called on Mike.
Mike. Oh yeah. Hello, Mike. How do you vote?
Oh, yes.
All right.
Thank
Sounds
you.
like that's unanimous among the members present.
So that will adopt the report. What I'm gonna do is I'll make those changes. I'll wait for PVPC to send us their amended report, amended interim draft report. Those two words are important. And when I get that, by next week, I will attach it. I'll send it to Council President Letterman. So we will have it for the meeting of the full council on the 18th. I talked to Council President Letterman, so I will make that report to the council on the 18th, which is the date of our last meeting. I spoke to Council President Letterman about this because he has, I think it's 4 working committees, each of which have close to 10 people on them. And it is our last meeting of the year. He didn't think that that was the best time to have everybody down to talk about each of their reports, because we could go for hours talking about the important work of each of the 4 groups and not get to the council's business that night. So I will make the report, and Council President Letterman is going to schedule a separate evening to thank and honor the members of these committees and to reflect on their work and the reports that were given. So that will not be during the regular council meeting on the 18th at 7 o'clock. He hasn't scheduled it yet when it's going to be, but as soon as that happens, I'll make sure all the committee members get that notice, and would ask you all to please try to come so you can get your citation and proclamation thanking you for your service to the city, and probably a chance to also talk about the work of the committee with the media. Okay. Any other business?
I would just like to follow up, and tomorrow or whenever is probably fine too, but when we're thinking about planning, scheduling the charrettes, if you want me to help with that scheduling piece, if you want me to take the lead on that again, let me know. Eric's giving me a thumbs up, but I'm looking at Counselor Fenton on that. Because that was in the original agreement. That was one of the things that the city rep had to do. Happy to do that, as well as call on some of our colleagues who are chatting about some things that will make them successful and accessible.
Giving thanks, I also want to thank Councilman Fenton for his early activity in creating a document to shove in front of the mayor and say, please sign. I thank you for that.
Well, it has been a real honor and a pleasure working with this group. And I said at the outset that my expertise and skill set was not in digital equity. That's not, before these meetings, I didn't have any real knowledge of the depth. I understood what the issue was, but didn't understand it in an in-depth way. And Council President Letterman, to his credit, appointed this group because he knew that we would take the task seriously, that we would roll up our sleeves and try to get it done. And, along the way, as running a committee like this,
Thanks,
You're
everyone.
welcome. Great job.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, everybody on the committee, and thank you to the public. And especially PVPC for helping us to, supply that tangible.
That's right. That's right.
I think it's important to note that a building that lasts for many years and is used by many people, its longevity is based upon how well the foundation was built.
That's right.
That's what we're talking about, what Mike is saying. We have taken this seriously, and we will continue to do so, whether we're on a committee or not, so that this foundation is built very strong, and digital equity will be a pillar within this community.
That's right. So with that
Yes,
said,
indeed.
do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Moved by Gene, seconded by Will. Roll call. Gene?
Yes. I'm sorry. Am I asking people to do the roll call?
I am.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
How do you vote on adjourning, Charlie?
Yes.
Alex?
Yes.
Will?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. So this adjourns our final meeting, and I'll be back in touch about an evening with the council president and proclamations. Thank you all for your service.
Wonderful.